The biting July cold penetrated my bones as I positioned myself on the corner of Rua das Acacias. I adjusted my old patched coat, a gift from my neighbor, Dona Zuliide, and took a deep breath. The street was almost deserted, but I knew I had to try. Mom needed me. When night comes, I'm going to sing. I began softly, my voice shaking a little at first. Little by little, I gained confidence. It was Mom's favorite song, the one she used to sing to me before she got sick. As I sang, my thoughts flew to our little apartment. Mom would be there, lying in bed, fighting an illness that the doctors barely understood. The rent was overdue, the bills were piling up, and her medicine, well, it was better not to even think about the price. A few people hurried past, throwing a few coins into the old cap I had placed on the ground. I smiled gratefully, without stopping singing. Every penny counted. That's when I noticed the car. A huge, shiny vehicle that seemed out of place on that simple street. It slowed to a complete stop in front of me. The driver's window slowly lowered. "Hello, little one," said a deep, gentle voice. "What a beautiful voice you have." I stopped singing, a little scared. Mom always warned me about strangers, but something about that gentleman with the gray hair and kind eyes made me feel safe. "Oh, thank you, sir," I stammered. He smiled, extending his hand out of the car. Between his fingers shone something that made my eyes widen. A gold coin. "For you. For the beautiful song," he said. I hesitated for a moment, but the urgency of our situation spoke louder. I took the coin with trembling hands. "Thank you so much," I exclaimed, hardly believing my luck. The man nodded, his gaze curious. "What's your name, dear?" I replied. "Maria." I replied, "Maria da Silva." "Well, Maria," he said, "you have a special gift. Don't waste it." With those enigmatic words, the window went up and the car drove off, leaving me alone again on the cold street. I looked at the coin in my hand, feeling a mixture of hope and confusion. That night, I didn't know it, but my life was about to change forever. The man in the luxury car, Mr. Oliveira, as I would later discover, would be the catalyst for a journey I could never have imagined. With a light heart and slightly heavier pockets, I returned home, eager to show Mom the result of that unusual evening. Little did I know that that gold coin was just the beginning of an adventure that would test my courage, my voice, and my heart in ways I never imagined possible. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Mom coughing. The sun had barely risen, but it was time to start another day of fighting. I jumped out of my makeshift bed on the sofa and ran into her room. "Good morning, Mommy," I whispered, helping her to sit up. "How are you feeling today?" She smiled weakly, her eyes tired but full of love. "Better now that I've seen you, my little angel." As I prepared breakfast with what little we had, I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. The gold coin weighed in the pocket of my old coat like a precious secret. "Mom," I began hesitantly, "last night, something incredible happened." I told her about the man in the car and the gold coin. Her eyes widened with surprise and concern. "Maria, my child, you have to be careful," she said, holding my hand. "Not everyone means well." I nodded, understanding her concern. "I know, Mom, but he seemed so kind." At that moment, a loud knock on the door startled us. It was Mr. Gomez, our landlord, collecting the overdue rent. With a heavy heart, I took the gold coin and went to the door. Mr. Gomez was stunned when I handed him the coin. "This covers this month's and next month's rent," he said in disbelief. "Where did you get this, miss?" "It was a present," I replied simply, quickly closing the door. I went back to Mom's room, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. The rent was paid, but the precious coin was gone. "You did what needed to be done, my dear," Mom said, noticing my expression. "I'm proud of you." That afternoon, as I walked to my usual corner seat, I noticed a colorful poster stuck to a post. "Great Talent Contest," it announced in bright letters. "Prize of 50,000 Brazilian reals for the winner." My heart raced. That money could pay for Mom's treatment and much more. But how could I, a simple street girl, compete against trained singers? As I prepared to sing, I saw the same luxury car from the night before approaching. My stomach did a flip. Mr. Oliveira stepped out of the car, smiling kindly. "Hello, Maria," he said. "I hope I'm not in the way." "And no, sir," I stammered. He looked at the competition poster and then at me. "Have you ever thought about taking part?" I lowered my eyes, embarrassed. I I don't think I have a chance." Mr. Oliveira knelt down to my height. "Maria, you have an extraordinary gift. I could help you develop it if you want." I looked at him, a mixture of hope and fear in my heart. That offer could change everything, but Mom had always warned me about trusting strangers. However, something in his eyes made me want to believe. Would you? Would you do that?" He nodded solemnly. "It would be an honor. What do you say? Would you like to give your dream a chance?" At that moment, I felt like I was on the edge of a precipice, about to jump into the unknown. With my heart racing, I made my decision. "Yes," I replied, my voice shaking with emotion. "I want to try." Mr. Oliveira's smile widened, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Great. We'll start tomorrow. Get ready, Maria. Your life is about to change." As I watched him go, I could hardly contain my excitement. That night, I sang with more passion than ever, my heart full of hope for the future. Little did I know the challenges and surprises that awaited me on this new journey. The next day dawned with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. I explained to Mom about Mr. Oliveira and his offer to help me. She was apprehensive, but saw the glimmer of hope in my eyes and reluctantly agreed. "Just promise you'll be careful, my love," she said, stroking my cheek. I promised, kissing her forehead before leaving. Mr. Oliveira was waiting for me in front of our building, his shiny car contrasting with the dusty street. "Ready to start, Maria?" he asked with a warm smile. I nodded, swallowing. He opened the car door for me, and I hesitated for a moment before getting in. The interior was more luxurious than anything I had ever seen. We arrived at a large building in the city center. "Welcome to the Oliveira Foundation for the Arts," he announced as we entered. The place was incredible, with music, dance, and art rooms everywhere. Young talents practiced in every corner. I felt small and out of place. "Don't be intimidated," Mr. Oliveira said gently, noticing my expression. "Everyone here started out like you." We went into a room with a grand piano. An elegant woman was waiting for us. "Maria, this is Madame Lacilia, our vocal instructor," introduced Mr. Oliveira. Madame Lacilia looked me up and down, her critical gaze making me want to cringe. "Sing something for me, dear," she ordered. My legs trembling, I began to sing the song I always sang in the street. I closed my eyes, imagining that I was there, singing to my mother. When I finished, I opened my eyes to see Madame Lacilia and Mr. Oliveira exchanging meaningful glances. "There's a lot of work to be done," said Madame Lacilia, "but there's potential. A lot of potential." The next few hours were intense. I learned about breathing, posture, and techniques I had never imagined existed. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, but strangely excited. "You did very well today, Maria," praised Mr. Oliveira as he drove me home. "Tomorrow we'll start working on your presentation for the competition." When I got home, I found Mom asleep. I left a kiss on her forehead and went to the sofa, my head spinning with the day's events. It was then that I heard an irritated voice coming from the hallway. It was our neighbor, SCU Joao, arguing with someone. "You can't buy the whole building. Where are we going to live?" Curious, I opened the door and saw a well-dressed man answering coldly. "I'm sorry, but the deal is already done. You have a month to move in." My heart froze. Move? How could we move with Mom sick? And where would we go? I closed the door quietly, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. The dream that had begun to form now seemed to be threatened by this new reality. I lay down on the sofa, determined not to let my mother know about this new problem. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll have to sing better than ever. It was no longer just about fulfilling a dream. It was about saving our home. With that resolution, I fell asleep, unaware that the complications were only just beginning. The path I had chosen to follow was about to become much more challenging than I could have imagined. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of singing lessons, rehearsals, and worries about our housing situation. I tried my hardest at lessons with Madame Lacilia, determined to win the contest and solve our financial problems. One afternoon, While practicing a new vocal technique, I heard altered voices coming from the hallway. I immediately recognized Mr. Oliveira's voice. "You can't do this, Ricardo. These people have nowhere else to go." "Business is business, uncle," replied a younger, colder voice. "If you're so worried, why don't you buy the building yourself?" I held my breath. Was the man who wanted to evict us Mr. Oliveira's nephew? My heart raced when I heard footsteps approaching the room I was in. The door opened, revealing Mr. Oliveira and a younger, well-dressed man with a calculating look. His eyes fixed on me immediately. "So that's her?" asked Ricardo, looking me up and down. "Your newest charity, uncle?" I felt my face burn with shame and anger. "Maria is a talented student," replied Mr. Oliveira firmly, "and she deserves a chance, just like all the young people we help here." Ricardo shrugged, disinterested. "If you say so. But remember, uncle, not everyone can be saved." With one last disdainful glance in my direction, he left the room. Mr. Oliveira sighed heavily. "I apologize for that, Maria. My nephew can be difficult at times." I swallowed, gathering my courage. "Mr. Oliveira, is he? Is he the man who wants to buy our building?" Mr. Oliveira's expression saddened. "Yes, Maria. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was your building. Ricardo has made several real estate investments lately. But what about the families who live there? My mother is ill. We can't move," I exclaimed, tears welling up in my eyes. Mr. Oliveira placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, Maria. I'll talk to him, try to change his mind." I nodded gratefully, but an uncomfortable feeling remained with me. That evening, on my way home, I found my mother crying silently. "What happened, Mom?" I asked, alarmed. She showed me an eviction notice. "We only had 3 weeks to leave." "It'll be okay, Mom," I promised, hugging her tightly. "I'll win the contest and we'll be able to move to a better place." But while I was comforting her, my mind was racing. The contest was still weeks away. We needed a quicker solution. The next day, I arrived early at the foundation, determined to talk to Mr. Oliveira about our situation. But as I approached his office, I heard loud voices again. "You're throwing money away on these charity projects, uncle," was Ricardo's voice. "And now you want me to give up a lucrative business because of a street girl?" "This street girl, as you call her, has more talent at her fingertips than you'll ever have, Ricardo," Mr. Oliveira retorted. I froze in place, torn between gratitude for Mr. Oliveira and fear of what Ricardo might do. "We'll see," Ricardo replied, his voice laden with menace. "But remember, uncle, I have a lot to lose if this little project of yours goes wrong. And you know what I'm capable of when I feel threatened." I heard footsteps approaching and quickly hid behind a bookcase. Ricardo rushed out, his face contorted with anger. At that moment, I realized that my journey had become much more complicated. It wasn't just about singing well or winning a contest. There were powerful people involved, with conflicting interests. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. I had to win, not just for me and my mother, but for all the families in our building. And somehow, I would have to deal with Ricardo and his veiled threats. The road ahead looked darker and more dangerous than ever. But I was determined to face it, no matter what the cost. In the days that followed, I devoted myself even more to rehearsals. The threat of Ricardo hung over me like a dark cloud, but I refused to let the fear overwhelm me. One afternoon, while practicing a particularly difficult song, I noticed a girl about my age watching me from the doorway. She had long black hair and curious eyes. "Hi," she said shyly. "I'm Luana. You sing very well." "Thanks," I replied, a little awkwardly. "I'm Maria." Luana entered the room, her eyes shining with admiration. "You're going to take part in the contest, aren't you?" "Me too." I felt a twinge of competitiveness, but Luana's sincere smile quickly dispelled it. "That's great," I exclaimed. "What kind of music do you sing?" We started chatting animatedly about music, our lives and dreams. Luana, I discovered, was the daughter of a famous businessman and had been at the foundation for years. Even so, she showed no air of superiority. "Maria," she said suddenly, her expression serious, "I need to tell you something. I overheard my father talking about you with Uncle Ricardo." My heart froze. What did they say? Luana hesitated. Ricardo wants to take you out of the contest. He, he thinks you're a threat to his plans. I sat back, stunned. But why? What did I do? I don't know all the details, Luana whispered. But it has something to do with Mr. Oliveira wanting to help you. Ricardo thinks it's going to get in the way of some of his business. At that moment, Madame Lacilia entered the room, interrupting our conversation. But Luana gave me a look that clearly said, "We'll talk later." During the lesson, I could barely concentrate. My mind was spinning with new information. Ricardo wasn't just a cold businessman. He was a real enemy. After class, Luana pulled me into a discreet corner. "Maria, I want to help you," she said firmly. "What Ricardo is doing isn't fair." "But how?" I asked, feeling a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Luana smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "I have access to a lot of information through my father. I can find out more about Ricardo's plans." "Wouldn't that be dangerous for you?" I asked, worried. She shrugged. "Maybe, but it's the right thing to do. Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "I love a bit of adventure." At that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt for a long time: hope. Having Luana as an ally completely changed the game. "Thank you, Luana," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "You don't know how much this means to me." She hugged me tightly. "We're friends now, and friends help each other." As I left the foundation that day, I felt lighter, despite the challenges ahead. I was no longer alone in this struggle. When I got home, I found Mom sitting on the bed, leafing through an old photo album. "Look what I found, daughter," she said, showing me a photo. In it, a young, smiling woman was holding a microphone on a stage. "Who is that?" I asked, intrigued. Mom's eyes shone with a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. "It's me, darling. Before you were born, before the illness, I also dreamed of being a singer." I was stunned. How had I never known that? "Why didn't you ever tell me, Mom?" She sighed. She sighed. "Sometimes life takes us in different directions than we planned. But seeing you now, I feel like my dream is living on through you." I hugged her tightly, feeling a new determination growing inside me. Now, it wasn't just our future that I was fighting for, but also my mother's interrupted dream. With Luana as an ally and my mother's legacy inspiring me, I was ready to face any obstacle that Ricardo or anyone else put in my way. The competition and my family's future depended on it. That night, I fell asleep with a new song in my heart, a melody of hope, friendship, and determination. The following weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. While I devoted myself to rehearsals with renewed intensity, Luana and I grew closer and closer, plotting ways to unravel Ricardo's plans. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting lesson with Madame Lacilia, Luana pulled me into a corner, her eyes shining with excitement. "Maria, I've discovered something," she whispered. "Ricardo has an important meeting tonight at my father's office. I think we can listen in." I hesitated. "Luana, isn't that too dangerous?" She shook her head, determined. "It's our only chance of knowing what he's planning. Will you come with me?" After a moment's thought, I nodded. The risk was worth it if we could protect my family and the others in the building. That night, we sneaked into the imposing business building where Luana's father worked. With our hearts racing, we hid behind a large ornamental plant near the meeting room. Soon, we heard the voices of Ricardo and Luana's father. "The plan is going perfectly," said Ricardo. "As soon as we evict the tenement dwellers, we can start building the new shopping complex. The profits will be astronomical." "What about your uncle?" asked Luana's father. "Isn't he trying to interfere?" Ricardo laughed coldly. "My uncle is very busy with his little singer protege. Little does he know that I'm using the girl to distract him from our real plans." I felt my blood run cold. Was I just a distraction? "What if the girl wins the contest?" asked Luana's father. "The prize could disrupt our plans." "Don't worry," Ricardo replied with a sinister tone. "I've already made sure that doesn't happen. The little street singer won't get anywhere near the stage on the day of the contest." Luana and I exchanged horrified glances. What was Ricardo planning to do to me? Suddenly, we heard footsteps approaching. Panicked, We ran as quietly as possible out of the building. On the street, panting, Luana hugged me. Maria, this is terrible. We have to tell Mr. Oliveira. I shook my head, confused and scared. What if he doesn't believe us? Ricardo is his family. Then we'll gather proof, said Luana, determined. I won't let them do this to you or the families in your building. That night, when I got home, I found my mother awake, looking worried. Maria, where were you? I was so worried. With a heavy heart, I decided to tell her everything about Ricardo, the eviction plans, and the threats to the competition. Mom listened in silence, her eyes filling with tears. When I'd finished, she hugged me tightly. My brave girl, she whispered. You shouldn't carry this weight alone. Tomorrow, we'll go together to see Mr. Oliveira. I fell asleep that night with my head full of worries, but also with a spark of hope. With Mom, Luana, and, hopefully, Mr. Oliveira by my side, maybe we could win this battle. What I didn't know was that the next day would bring even more shocking revelations and change the course of our story forever. The next morning, Mom and I headed to the Oliveira Foundation, determined to reveal everything to Mr. Oliveira. My heart was racing as we rode the elevator up to his office. When we arrived, however, we found an unexpected scene. Mr. Oliveira was not alone. Luana and her father were also there, as was Ricardo. Everyone seemed tense. Maria, I'm glad you're here, said Mr. Oliveira, his voice tired. We have a lot to talk about. Ricardo gave me an angry look. That girl shouldn't be here. This is a family matter. She's part of it now, Ricardo, replied Mr. Oliveira firmly. Turning to me, he continued, Maria, Luana told us everything you heard last night. I stared at Luana, who nodded encouragingly. Luana's father stepped forward, looking embarrassed. I want to apologize. I didn't realize things had gone so far. Ricardo snorted. You're exaggerating. It's just business. Business? I exclaimed, unable to contain myself. You're trying to make entire families homeless. You're threatening to sabotage a competition. Mr. Oliveira raised his hand, asking for silence. Ricardo, I tried to give you a chance. I believed you would change. But that's too far. It was then that Mom, who had been silent until that moment, stepped forward. Her eyes were fixed on Ricardo. I recognize you, she said, her voice trembling. You're Eduardo's son, aren't you? The silence that followed was deafening. Ricardo visibly paled. How do you know that? He stammered. Mom turned to me, tears in her eyes. Maria, there's something I've never told you. Before you were born, I was a singer in a club. That's where I met your father, Eduardo. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My father? She nodded. He was a businessman married. Our relationship was brief but intense. When I found out I was pregnant, he disappeared. Ricardo looked shocked. That can't be true. Mr. Oliveira approached, placing a hand on Ricardo's shoulder. Nephew, did you know about this? Ricardo shook his head, looking lost. Dad always said he left the past behind when he married Mom. I didn't know. The revelation hit everyone like a bombshell. Suddenly, we were no longer strangers fighting for opposing interests. We were a broken family, brought together by fate. Luana was the first to break the silence. Does that mean Maria and Ricardo are brother and sister? The reality of the situation began to set in. I looked at Ricardo, seeing him with new eyes. My brother. The man I considered my enemy was actually my older brother. Mr. Oliveira sighed deeply. That changes everything. Ricardo, do you understand now why we can't go ahead with this eviction plan? Ricardo nodded slowly, still looking stunned. I don't know what to say. Everything I thought I knew. Mom approached him, hesitantly. I'm sorry you had to find out like that. Your father, our father, he made mistakes, but I'm sure he loved you. The tears that Ricardo had been holding back finally fell. In a gesture that surprised me, he turned to me. Maria, I'm sorry for everything. At that moment, I realized that our journey had only just begun. We had a lot to sort out, a lot to learn about each other. But for the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we could do this together. The contest, the eviction, all the problems that had seemed so big moments before, suddenly seemed small compared to the magnitude of this revelation. Our family, broken and mended, had a chance to heal. As we all processed this new reality, one thing became clear. Nothing would ever be the same. And somehow, that gave me hope for the future. In the days that followed the revelation, our lives seemed to go into a kind of limbo. Ricardo immediately canceled the eviction plans, to the relief of everyone in the building. Mr. Oliveira, for his part, dedicated himself to mediating the delicate situation between all of us. One afternoon, while I was practicing on the foundation's piano, Ricardo came into the room, hesitating. May I? May I sit down for a moment?" he asked, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. I nodded, still uncertain how to act around him. He sat down next to me on the piano bench. "You know," Ricardo began, looking down at the keys, "I used to play when I was younger. Our dad, he taught me." I felt a lump in my throat. "What was he like?" I asked softly. Ricardo smiled sadly. "Complicated. Sometimes distant, sometimes incredibly present. I think he carried a lot of secrets and regrets." We were silent for a moment, both of us thinking about the man who connected us and whom we would never truly know. "Maria," Ricardo finally said, turning to me, "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try to make things right. Not just with you and our mother, but with all the families I almost damaged." I looked into his eyes for sincerity and found it. "It's a start," I replied. Over the next few days, I saw Ricardo transform. He worked tirelessly to create a renovation plan for the building where we lived, improving conditions for all the residents without raising the rent. He also offered to sponsor improvements to the Oliveira Foundation. Meanwhile, Mom and I were adjusting to the idea of our expanded family. Mr. Oliveira, now our uncle, visited us often, bringing stories about our father and the family we never knew we had. Luana, meanwhile, became a constant presence in our lives. She and I practiced together for the contest, which now seemed more like a celebration than a competition. One evening, while we were all having dinner together, Mom, Ricardo, Mr. Oliveira, Luana, and I, Ricardo raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice breaking, "to the family, to the one we lost, the one we found, and the one we're building." We toasted, all with tears in our eyes. The day of the competition finally arrived. Backstage, I was shaking with nerves. "You're going to rock," said Luana, hugging me. Ricardo approached me and put something in my hand. It was a locket. "It was our grandmother's," he explained. "Dad gave it to me before, well, I thought you should wear it today." I put the locket on, feeling its comforting weight. When I got up on stage, I saw my new family in the front row. Mom, Ricardo, Mr. Oliveira, Luana, all smiling encouragingly. I took a deep breath and started to sing. The music flowed out of me like never before, carrying all the emotions of the last few weeks: pain, joy, forgiveness, hope. When I finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. But what touched me most were the tears in my family's eyes. That night, I won more than a contest. I won a new chance, a complete family, and the certainty that, no matter what life throws at us, we can always start again. As we celebrated after the awards ceremony, I looked around and smiled. Our journey was far from over, but now we had each other to face whatever lay ahead. And that, I realized, was the biggest prize of all. The months that followed my winning the competition were ones of intense transformation. With the prize money, we were finally able to provide Mom with proper medical treatment, and she began to show signs of improvement. Ricardo, keeping his promise, not only renovated our building, but also created an arts support program for young people in the community. The old tenement was transformed into a vibrant cultural center with music, dance, and visual arts classes. One afternoon, while I was giving singing lessons to a group of children at the new center, Ricardo appeared in the doorway, watching with a smile. "You have a gift for teaching," he commented after the children had left. I blushed at the compliment. "Thank you. I'm just passing on what I've learned." Ricardo hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Maria, I have a proposal for you." What do you think about expanding this project? We could create cultural centers like this in other poor communities. I was stunned. Really? That would be incredible. He nodded enthusiastically. We could use my business contacts to get sponsorship. With your experience and talent, we could make a real difference to the lives of many children. That evening, we shared the idea with the rest of the family. Everyone was excited, especially Mr. Oliveira. This is exactly the kind of project I've always dreamed of for the foundation, he said, thrilled. Count on me to help. Mom, who was now strong enough to take a more active part in our lives, suggested, what about including composition lessons? I'd love to share what I've learned over the years. Luana, who had become a constant presence in our family, added, I could help with the dance classes, and I'm sure my father could help us with the administrative side. Over the next few months, we worked tirelessly to make this dream a reality. We faced challenges, of course, bureaucracy, skepticism from some investors, complicated logistics, but our determination was unwavering. A year after the competition, we inaugurated the first Hope Arts Center outside our community. Seeing the sparkle in the children's eyes as they entered the space for the first time was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. During the inauguration ceremony, I looked at my gathered family, Mom, Ricardo, Mr. Oliveira, Luana, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Just over a year ago, I was just a little girl singing in the street to help my sick mother. Now, we were changing lives. When it was my turn to speak, I took to the stage with a full heart. A year ago, I learned that music has the power to unite people, to heal wounds, and to open doors that seemed closed forever. I began. Today, we are opening those doors for hundreds of young talents. This center isn't just a place to learn the arts, it's a place to dream, to grow, and to transform lives. I looked at Ricardo, who nodded encouragingly. My journey has taught me that it doesn't matter where we come from or what obstacles we face. With love, determination, and a little music in our hearts, we can overcome any challenge and create something beautiful. As the audience applauded, I felt that this was just the beginning of a new and exciting journey. A journey of hope, growth, and love. And as I looked to the future, full of possibilities, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together as a family. 2 years have passed since the inauguration of the first Esperanza Arts Center. Our initiative had grown more than we ever imagined, with centers spread across several communities and thousands of young people benefiting. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I was organizing a talent festival at the original center when I received an unexpected call from Ricardo. Maria, you need to come to the office immediately. His voice sounded tense. We've found something about our father. With my heart racing, I asked Luana to take charge of the preparations and rushed to Ricardo's office. When I got there, I found not only Ricardo, but also Mom and Mr. Oliveira, all with serious expressions. What's going on? I asked, apprehensive. Ricardo took a deep breath before speaking. We were going through some old company documents when we found this. He handed me a weathered envelope. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. It was a letter from our father, Eduardo, dated a few days before his death. My dear brother, began the letter, addressed to Mr. Oliveira. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you the truth when I was alive. I made many mistakes, but my greatest regret was abandoning Maria and your mother. The truth is that I never forgot them. I tried to protect them by keeping my distance, but now I see that was cowardly. There's a bank account in Maria's name. All the money I've saved up over the years to try to make up for my absence. Please make sure she gets it when it's appropriate. And, if possible, tell her and Ricardo that, despite my mistakes, I loved them deeply. I hope that one day they can forgive me. When I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. I looked at Mom, who was also crying silently. Did you know that? I asked her. She shook her head. I had no idea. I always thought he just didn't care. Mr. Oliveira approached, putting a hand on my shoulder. I didn't know about that letter either. Your father? He was a complicated man, but I think in the end, he wanted to do the right thing. Ricardo, who had been silent until then, spoke up. There's more. The bank account mentioned in the letter, is a considerable sum. Enough to significantly expand our Arts Center project. I was silent for a moment, taking it all in. Then an idea began to form in my mind. What if we used that money to create a foundation in our father's name? I suggested. We could expand the art centers, create scholarship. 5 years had passed since the speech at the United Nations. The Arts for Life project had expanded to more than 100 countries, becoming a global movement for social change through art. One sunny morning, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. It was from the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. "Miss Silva," said the voice on the other end of the line, "it is with great pleasure that we inform you that you, together with the Eduardo Silva Foundation, have been chosen to receive this year's Nobel Peace Prize." I was speechless. The recognition was not just for me, but for every single person who had been part of this incredible journey. The award ceremony in Oslo was surreal. There were Mom, Ricardo, Mr. Oliveira, and Luana, all with tears in their eyes. But what really moved me was seeing the live broadcast to all our centers around the world, with thousands of young artists watching and celebrating. In my acceptance speech, I reflected on our journey. This award is not for me. It's for the girl who sang in the street to help her sick mother. It's for the entrepreneur who learned to see beyond profit and found purpose in helping others. It's for every young person who discovered their voice through art and used that voice to change their community. I looked at my family and continued. It's for my mother, who never stopped believing. For my brother Ricardo, who proved that change is possible when we open our hearts. For our uncle, who guided us with wisdom. And for our father, whose complex story taught us about redemption and second chances. I concluded with a message of hope. Art has the power to transcend borders, heal wounds, and bring people together. It reminds us of our shared humanity. In an often divided world, art offers us a common language of hope and possibilities. This award is a call to continue this symphony of change, to use our voices, our brushes, our movements to create a fairer, more compassionate, and more beautiful world. After the ceremony, our family gathered for an intimate moment. Mom, now with gray hair but her eyes shining with pride, hugged us. "Your father would be so proud," she said softly. "You've turned his story into something extraordinary." Ricardo, with tears in his eyes, added, "Who knew that day, when I heard a little girl singing in the street, would change our lives forever?" Mr. Oliveira raised his glass. "To family," he said, "in all its forms, and to the second chances that life offers us." Luana, ever the optimist, smiled. "And to the future. Imagine what else we can achieve." That evening, I reflected on our journey. From the little girl singing in the street to the leader of a global movement, every challenge, every twist and turn has brought us this far. I realized that our story was a testament to the power of art, love, and perseverance. It was proof that no matter where we start or what obstacles we face, there is always the possibility of creating something beautiful and meaningful. As I looked out of the hotel window at the lights of Oslo, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Our symphony had touched hearts around the world, and I knew that the melody would continue, inspiring future generations to use their voice, their art, to create a better world. And so, with a heart full of love and hope, I prepared for the next chapter in our collective story, knowing that the music we had begun would continue to echo, touching lives and transforming the world, one note at a time.